I'm going to show you how I made this vertical comic. There's nothing magical about how that happens. I follow a process and I trust myself to know how long it takes to make certain pieces of art and what needs to get done to make the comic. This is page 8, entitled Bingo Bango, for the current chapter of Magical Girl Kamiko, One of Us Part 2. We'll cover writing the script, storyboarding, producing the artwork for the comic, preparing this comic page to be published on my website and also other third-party sites like Tapas and Webtoons.
Before we get started, let's rewind and take a look at the previous page. So here's where we ended. She starts by ending that previous comic saying, "Hey Dingus, if you and King Dorfix got something to say, get down to my face and say it." That's the point in which we're going to continue. My writing tool of choice these days is Obsidian. Now, it's a note-taking app, but there are lots of plugins, and I feel like it's pretty versatile for a lot of my needs. And one of those is story writing, so that's where I do that now. So I tend to write by the seat of my pants. In fiction, I think you would call that person a pantser. They are the opposite of a person who outlines a story. What I'm writing is totally off the cuff. Is it good? No, it's not good, but it is a place to start. It is obviously not the most optimized way of writing a story. I don't really know what would be. I mean, definitely there are people who outline and can maybe swear by that, but I tend to like to take an idea and explore it by writing it until I can discover ideas. And yeah, that first draft is terrible, but allows me then to get to a second draft. It took me about an hour to write this first draft. I think it's too wordy. I don't feel it's reflective of the characters. I actually don't even think it's reflective of what I want the scene to be like. But like I said, it's a place to start. Usually when I'm done a writing session like this, I tend to just like to walk away from it and just let it sink in and come back to it with a fresh mind the next day or a couple of days later. The next day, during the afternoon, I decided to go take a walk. Taking a walk, aside from clearing my mind, is just a great way to get ideas flowing. And as I was walking, I did come up with a new idea for the script. It's basically the same script, but this time the language would be a lot more terse. The dialogue itself would be snappier. And I basically whipped out my iPhone and I just started typing it up. I like this second draft better because it feels punchier. Natsume's dialogue is a lot more terse. More importantly, I think she gets a punchline where she gets the accuse the Phantom of something, and I think that's pretty much where I'm going to end this chunk of the story. So I like this draft a lot better. I don't think it's perfect, but that's fine. Perfect is the enemy of good. It just has to exist so we can move on to the next phase, which is storyboarding. The big question I want to answer with storyboarding is really how much time is all of this art going to take? Now, when I draw a storyboard, I tend to just draw it to size. In the case of the webcomics or This Mortal Coil, they're vertical in length, and I make the width 3,840 pixels. Lengthwise, the comics can go up to like 40,000 pixels, 50,000 pixels. I don't really have a set size in mind, but it's large. The art is large enough that if I ever wanted to print this as a book, I could do that. As I'm storyboarding, I'm also taking time to actually letter the comic with the script that I have. And I do this so I can have an idea of where to put the actual word bubbles, how I might arrange them on the page so that as you look at the images, you can associate which word bubbles are with which character, how they flow down the page. As I put down the speech bubbles, it also helps me just know where to break up the dialogue for more dramatic effect. Because when I write a script, it comes out as just like a big block of text. I want to split that up so that it feels like you're reading it as you're going down the page, and you can have dramatic pauses and moments where there are interruptions and so on. Things that I, wouldn't capture as well in the script.
So I wanted to walk through the storyboards and the final art, and just to give you a better sense of how one becomes the other and the decisions I had made. So let's do that right now. I've got Clip Studio open, and I have my storyboards highlighted, and I'll show you how I got from here to the final artwork. If you remember in the script, I talked about having a big opening establishing shot. And that's what this is supposed to depict. This was the idea I originally had. It would be a bird's eye view looking down. You would have the Phantom in the middle. You would have all of these angels flying in. There would be the Misty Wood. And our two main characters would be here. These two small little triangles that I drew in. So that would be a really cool shot to have. I also feel like this would take a lot of time to make. Like I'm thinking like it would take like 20 hours at least. Obviously in the final comic, if you see it side by side, I didn't go with this. The next two shots I had were supposed to be paired together. Is the idea that the Phantom was going to fly down and, you know, look her straight in the eye, just like she suggested in the previous comic. And then I wanted a side by side, almost like a Street Fighter style, her versus him kind of set of images, and it would get into the bulk of the conversation. So as I was putting the storyboard together, I also started to layer in the text as well, just so I could see where it would be, where it would flow. I certainly wanted to keep some things in mind, such as the fact that Natsumi is always on the left side, the Phantom is always on the right side, and so you can kind of keep your stage direction the same as you're going down the comic. So like she's on the left here. If I keep going down, even this, like she's on the left. Here we're looking at her straight on, which I think is fine. And at the end, the final art also has her on the left. And the Phantom in this case, like for this one where it's like you see Natsumi from behind, I think we're still on the right. I forget what it's called in cinematography, but there's like a certain line you don't want to cross. And I think we're okay because we're looking basically over her shoulder at him. So we're still like everybody's still oriented on the same part of the stage. But yeah, so this is where like the bulk of the conversation takes place between Natsume and the Phantom. And it gets down here, like, so the one shot of her where we're looking at her directly, she's making her big proclamation. She's like, it's kind of her moment. Conversation continues, and you know that's the end of this comic, and that's the loose storyboarding I had done. So that's what the storyboard ended up being. And now this would be the production phase of the comic, where I worked on various parts of the art. And one of the first things I worked on was this two kind of like versus image and return the sketch I had done. If I click on that, there is a 3D model for the Phantom. It's not super fleshed out, it's just fleshed out enough. So if I actually go in here, so this is a mode inside of Clip Studio. It's under Window, and if you go to all sides view, you can actually view your 3D model like a quadrant view that you would see in Blender or any kind of 3D program. So there it is. That is the 3D view of the Phantom. As you can see in this all sides view, I am able to just freely rotate around him, and you can see it as it's compared to what it is in the actual comic up in this little slice of this little window, that it's not moving it up here, and I'm able to just freely, you know, look around this 3D model. I created this 3D model using Blender. As you can see, it's a very simple set of spheres and rings, and I used an array modifier to actually build out basically all of the eyes around the rings, copied and pasted it, scaled it down, scaled it bigger, and formed it into this, and I can use this model then to just draw over top of. So I've basically maneuvered the camera. You can actually get the camera and maneuver it into a view that you want. It's easier to use these controls up here to do that. It's kind of easier. I mean, Clip Studio's 3D tools, like they're nice, but they're cumbersome. Once you click off the layer, like it clips properly with the comic panel that it's in. And then I'm also able then just to put a layer on top once I've reduced the opacity of it and just draw over top of it. I think right now it's like the actual sketch layer is kind of displaced from this. Like if I move this more correctly, yeah, so it should look like that. So I don't bother to redraw this. I just draw in the necessary elements I need, which are going to be the eyes. And then that allows me then to go and start painting right away. And so that is, let me hide these layers. That is what the final painted version looks like. The 3D model is used as a guide for all of this. And then I was able then to draw the eyes and stuff on top. I think it looks like I've also just moved. I don't know whether I did that by accident or not, but probably sometime during production, I moved the eye so that he would look better in frame. Natsumi, on the other hand, was actually really easy to draw. I had a sketch of her. I just fleshed out the sketch and then just painted the whole thing. Likewise, this bust of both the fairy woman and Natsume wasn't too difficult to do. Something like, a headshot, a bust, like it's really quick to just make. Something like using a 3D model, certainly with a shot like this, it's not too difficult. Just because I have the 3D model, I can orient it in place and then I can just paint over top of it. So this one with the giant eye, this actually took me quite a long time to do. So as a reference, I basically went to Google. I found a reference of an eye that I really liked, brought it into the project. I used the distort or perspective tool, basically kind of squished it into place. I don't think it's perfect in that it's not like a perfect ellipse, but it works. And then I painted over top of it. And I got in here and I just used the fibers that you see in the reference image and painted over top of it. So I did try to do this by hand without actually directly using a reference to essentially trace over. And it's quite difficult to kind of get the shapes that I wanted. I think I tried it maybe 4 or 5 times over the course of like 2 hours just to try and build the look of this without directly using a reference. And after a couple hours, I just thought it was silly to keep trying it. It's like, you know what? It's not like I'm tracing every little detail. I am using it to help me figure out where to place a lot of these like worm-like slivers. And then I would basically do my own interpretation from there. Like you can see a lot of this stuff doesn't really follow these fibers. They just enough to give the sense of it. I originally created this in Blender. I'll have a shot. I actually have some video footage of working inside a Blender, building this scene. I have basically this bunny girl version of Kamiko or Natsumi that I did a long time ago. And I basically put a giant sphere and put it in front of her and then put down this plane for a dock. This is the drawing I made over top of that. I'll just hide the 3D mock-up and also just hide the actual art too. It's actually super difficult to see, and it was very simple. It's basically just an image of Natsume or Kamiko from behind, and it just had to be enough of a gestural drawing for me to then paint over. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time, especially because I'm using a 3D mock-up and I don't want to have to do all the details again and again. So then let's go back to the final image. Let's hide all this storyboard stuff. Once I can get the big shapes down, I can figure out where I want the light to hit, and that's where I would then carve away a lot of the black and give it dimension that way. Things like her legs, for instance, and her shoes, and then the dock. I wanted to act like a bit of a transition. And this is where I need to keep in mind, like, what parts of the comic will be black versus white. So you can see towards the top, like we have, behind all of the panels, we have a lot of black. And then here we have a lot of white, but that's because you have the giant eyeball. And then of course you have Natsume standing on the dock, and then it's like, well, what are we putting behind here? Like it's basically just like once you look out to the horizon, it's just more sea. It's just more water. So the sky is also white, and that's why I've got this very slim slim like rim shading for the eye itself. And so this then dovetails down into this next frame, which is going to be like this head-on shot of her. There's a lot of dialogue, but I'm not showing that here. And then the final image is going to be, yeah, here we go. This is all the dialogue between Natsume and the Ophanum. The Ophanum, I have his color set as orange. And he doesn't get speech bubbles because he's just yelling. Whereas she does have speech bubbles, and all her speech bubbles in the case of this comic, are all on the left side. They either the carrot, you know, points to her, it's coming from the left, or the bubbles themselves are on the left, and that's so that reinforces who is talking from which direction of the stage. I suppose this last one kind of breaks it, but she is interrupting him and just doing her big objection moment, the establishing shot. So this is the last one, and it is the last one I worked on because I thought for the longest time it was going to be that other image from the storyboard that I was going to draw. But as I worked on these top images, if you remember, it was meant to be 2 frames. One where the Ophanum is up high, and then it shows him then moving down to get eye level with her. And in the end, I decided not to do that. It seemed kind of redundant to have 2 frames. And when I was actually building the art, it just seemed to make sense to start with him just at eye level. Like, why bother to show him moving down through space, getting there? He should just be there already, and we can just start there. So then that eliminated having to do 2 frames. And so I focused on this. I actually have this broken down where it's like I drew the fairy woman and Natsume standing on this dock with the water down below, thinking that I was going to basically copy and paste this and put it as the other frame as well. But then when I started to figure out the dimensions of the Ophanum himself, he was going to be a pretty sizable thing in the image. And in fact, I don't think this would be even remotely the correct scale. It's like what would fit that makes sense to tell this part of the story. Like, he's big. Basically, we want to show that he is big and they are small. But as I started to wrestle with this idea that, okay, he's going to be really big in frame, it gave me new ideas. And that's where I started thinking, it might be neat if he extended even further upwards. And it also might be neat if we started breaking the panels apart. And that kind of made me think this could be the establishing shot. It really seems like, it really just felt like the thing to do. Like, it's basically like there's stare down. And then what I could do is that as we're, really because you would read it from top to bottom, as we're going down, you would see the clouds, and then you would also see the angels. Like, yeah, this isn't as cool as, say, a perspective shot from a bird's eye view. But in terms of like the stagecraft needed to set up this moment, I feel like it's good enough for what I need. And so that's how then this became the establishing shot. And it eliminated doing like a 25 hour piece of art that you would only look at for a couple seconds anyway. And so it's a lot more economical to do this. Okay, well, we finished making the comic, but we're not done yet. We still got to upload it to the internet. I'm going to show you how I do that right now. First, let's take a look at these 3 files. The one in the middle is the entire comic exported out as a TIFF file. I would prefer PNG, but since the comic is over 35,000 pixels tall, it has to be a TIFF. I don't have to export it out that large, but I want the full size to work from anyway. I also make a version without the word bubble, so I can use it to cut the thumbnail and social media key images. To make the social media image, I use the textless version of the comic and crop an area that's 1200 by 630 pixels. I try and find something that's eye-catching and has a decent composition and doesn't give away the end of the comic. Then I open up Affinity Designer to make the social media card itself. I pre-made a template for the card, so I'll make a new file with one and plot my images right in. I've already made this file, so you can see I've got 2 different images I'm testing out. I decided to go with a versus image. I like the eyeball one a lot, but I feel that I want you to see that first when you open up the comic and read it. Also, the text hides the smaller figures on that image, so I didn't think it was as impactful. So back to the file folder. And those are the artifacts for the social media card I've produced. Now onto the thumbnail. My site needs a 512 by 512 pixel icon. Tapas and Webtoon need icons too, but of different sizes. I'll show you how those get made later. So, the last thing I need is text for the blog entry to accompany the comic. Yes, the comic should speak for itself, but I need something for SEO reasons. A blog post that's an image without any text feels like it wouldn't register with the crawler. Maybe I'm wrong. But this has led me to do a wacky thing, which is to novelize the comic page. And what you're seeing here is the written version of that comic. It helps that I enjoy creative writing and this lets me flex that muscle. But yes, I'm doing it primarily for my web crawler audience. But I hope you enjoy it too. So here's where things get complicated. I'm a software engineer. I'm used to looking at code and stuff like that. I don't use WordPress for my own webcomic blog. I use a framework called Gatsby.js, and it generates a static website. So what that means is that there's no backend. There's nothing on the server that can be hacked. It's literally just computer-generated HTML data and images. Sounds easy, but it's all fairly complicated under the hood. All of the assets I've generated are now going to be fed into a Python script I created to output all of the data that I need. And so if we go back here and look at visual code, this is my Python script called webcomic-formatter.py. It's actually available on GitHub so that you too, if you wanted, could use it. And the idea is if you give it a directory, so I have that an example down here. So if I call this script webcomic formatter with the directory, by the way, you would stick it in double quotes so you could have all the spaces and stuff preserved and read properly. It will look at that directory and it's going to output then all of the images. You can actually see an example here. So here I'm calling Python. This is the directory for One of Us Part 2. And it actually tells you what it's doing. So it created a folder and it took my really tall vertical image and it split it up into 6 files. It also built this thing called a markdown file. So let's jump over, look at the data folder again. I have this new site folder that it generates. This is the vertical comic. It gets split into these 6 files. Or sorry, I guess these like 7 files. This is the thumbnail. It simply just copies that over. And then this is a social media card. It's also copied over. And I have this index.markdown file. This actually contains the blog post data. We can actually open this up. Let's just drag that into Visual Code. So here we are in Visual Code. So this is the blog post that gets generated. It's in a format called Markdown, and I have all of this metadata up here that I need to fill in, such as the title, the slug, etc. The date, post type del gets generated for me. This is the most important part. These are all the images and how they are used by the website when it actually builds the web page. This is the body of the blog text, which is going to be my story. I'm not going to switch project to the Mortal Coil website. This is what the website looks like on my PC. It's all done in React and Gatsby. So it's all JavaScript code. So I've got this content folder. One of its subfolders is called comics, and one of them is called Magical Girl Kamiko. And this is the folder that contains page 8 of One of Us Part 2, the comic I just finished. I copy over all of the images and the markdown file that my tool created and put it into this folder. So these are all of the images of the art I created. That's the social media card. This is the thumbnail. and this is then the final version of the markdown text. I've gone in here, I've put the title in, set the slug up. It's meant to match the name of the folder. Set up both the comic name, which is Magical Girl Kamiko, the chapter, which is internally I call it MGK One of Us Redux, and it'll know where to find the images because they're all basically in the same folder. Once I've got this done, I can actually test all of this locally. I can type in Gatsby develop. Here is the website running locally on my machine. As you can see, it says localhost 8000. Here you can see that this is the comic. And if I scroll through all the way to the bottom, this is the text that I wrote for it. And yeah, this allows me to see what it would look like when I actually launch it online. And now that I've committed all my changes and I've pushed them up to GitHub, all of my files are here, including the social media card and the thumbnail. And so that's actually it for me. Like, I've published a comic. What happens next is that my web host, Vercel, will process and rebuild the entire website so that I get a new set of static pages in HTML and JavaScript, and it'll post it on my domain, mortalcoilcomic.com. Then we're done. Now, as for you, if you're making your comic, you're probably not going to have this complicated process. You might have a WordPress site, and you could just log into that and upload your comic and use like a WordPress child theme to display it, and it's perfectly fine. I used to do that as well for Mortal Coil. You can use a third party like Tapas or Webtoon or a Comic Fury. I actually distribute the comic to all of those sites as well. To distribute the comic to Comic Fury, Webtoon, and Tapas, these are the steps that I would take. So using my webcomic formatting tool, I have a bunch of configuration that I can do. One is for the site, and I have entries for Tapas, Webtoon, Comic Fury, and like Instagram and DeviantArt, but I no longer post there. So I really just care about these three portals. This is where I can define like how big the images are. One reason why I built this tool is because Tapas, Webtoon, they all have different max widths that you need to conform to. And I thought it would just be easier if I just had a tool that would resize my tall image and cut it up properly for each website. They also have different dimensions for the icons, and this tool also helps resize images to fit all of those different needs. So for Tapas, I have my max width and height set as 940 by 1689. The thumbnails, the max are 300 by 300. Webtoon, their max width is 800, and I split it up by 1200 pixels high. Their thumbnail width and height is 160 by 151. Comic Fury's max width is 950, and their thumbnail is 150 by 150. So yeah, everybody's got something a little bit different. Folder structure, I have this distro folder, and the distro folder has Comic Fury, Tapas, and Webtoon. And so I've got all the sized images correctly made for each of these. And so if we look at this, it's taken all of the images of the comic, it's split them up for Comic Fury, and it's put the thumbnail there. Same with Tapas, but because Tapas's dimension is different, we have more images in a thumbnail. For Webtoon, we have, again, a different set of images at a different resolution. At this point, it's a matter of going to each of those portals and uploading the comic, and that's it. Everything is published the way that I want it, and I'm done. So that is a long and thorough look at my process for making a comic. To recap, we have gone over the writing process, storyboarding, producing the artwork, and placing the dialogue bubbles, and finally publishing the finished work to my website, Comic Fury, Tapas, and Webtoon. It is a lot, and we'll do it again for the next comic. I don't know when that will drop because my comic making schedule is at best erratic. So until next time, have a good one.